From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark. This week, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of talking about a certain political race or a significant piece of legislation, we're going to talk to a reporter who's been covering it all for half a century. John Lindstrom is the former publisher of Gongwer News Service in Lansing. He's retired now, but he started his career as a student beat reporter and spent a few years covering the intersection of business and policy with Crain's Detroit Business. But the vast majority of his career was with Gongwer. Gongwer is basically the paper of record for all things state politics. It's the industry news read by me and Rick and all the journalists, politicians, and lobbyists alike to stay in touch with what's happening at the state capitol. And it's in part because of John's leadership at Gongwer that he was inducted recently into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. Because John spent so many years covering the state capitol and a half a dozen governors, we asked him to come talk about his long career and how Lansing has changed along the way. John Lindstrom, welcome to It's Just Politics.
How are you?
So, when did you first start covering state politics?
Well, I did a little bit of it off and on when I was at the state news at Michigan State. I covered the administration for Michigan State, so I covered the president's office. But that ended up involving things like the budget that the university would get. So every now and then I would be downtown watching the legislature as they worked on the budget. And then the first newspaper job I got after college was for a small weekly in Fenton, or Fenton as we always say, which is outside Flint. And I ended up covering a bunch of local governments, Fenton Township, sometimes the city council, various school boards, which of course would wrap itself up into what was happening with the state and what was going on there. Sometimes I'd have to talk to the state legislators. Same thing when I went to the Adrian Daily Telegram. I covered county government and also covered elections and politics. So in bits and pieces, I covered state government that way. And then my old roommate had gone to work for Gongwer News Service, and he decided to go get a law degree. And so he was going to Wayne, I think is where he went for his law degree, and he suggested that they talk to me, I talked to them, and they hired me. So in 1977, in September of 77, I started covering state government for Gongwer News Service. In total, I covered state government directly for Gongwer for almost 40 years.
What's your favorite story you've covered?
Oh, wow. Covering the state? I would say, in many respects, it was the hardest story. It was the most, in many respects, the most significant story, and in the end becomes my favorite story, and that was the development and passage of Proposal A, which changed, of course, school financing. I was there the fateful night in July of 1993 when the Senate voted to eliminate all property taxes for education, and the next day, the House went along with that, and that began the almost endless struggle to figure out a way of financing schools in this state, which ended at about noon on Christmas Eve in 1993. And it was sort of like never ending. You were there all the time. I mean, we had just moved back to East Lansing. We had bought a house. I'd be out of the house by 7:30 in the morning. I'd get back at 11:30 at night, and I'd walk through and say, "Oh, we're painting today. I had no idea." "Oh, look at that. We've got a new kitchen counter. How about that? I didn't know that was happening." And it just was like that way all the time. The last several days before they finally reached resolution, at midnight, the legislature broke, and the leaders, the two speakers, the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, Dick Posthumus and John Cherry, those two, went into a overnight meeting with Governor Engler to try to work out a final deal. And Phil Arthur Holtz, who was the Republican majority floor leader, said, "Well, if you come back over here about 4 o'clock in the morning, we're going to have a deal. So you guys just all come back at 4 o'clock in the morning." And I thought to myself, okay, I guess I can go home, get a couple hours sleep, and be back at 4 o'clock. And I thought, who the hell am I kidding? Who's going to give a damn at 4 o'clock in the morning what's been done? I'll just come back at the normal time. But that's how crazy it had gotten. And that final session that finally ended at about noon on Christmas Eve We were in session for close to 36, 38 hours. I mean, just nonstop, me working. People were sleeping on the floor. People were passed out on chairs. It was crazy. It was just crazy. So it was an incredibly intense, fierce situation, and yet it was the most consequential action the legislature had taken in decades. And of course, we still operate under that, and there's been talk now about making changes to what happened with Proposal A, especially the pop-up tax if you sell your house and things like that. But in the end, that probably was overall the most intense and therefore my favorite story to have covered.
How has Lansing changed since then?
Well, if you go back through the whole history, back to the 70s, the thing that has changed the most dramatically is the partisanship and the extreme end of partisanship. I'm not saying things were perfect back in the 70s and then in the 60s. And I have kind of a personal theory about why things may have worked better back then. But people understood that things had to get done. And it didn't matter if you were a Republican or a Democrat. This stuff had to get done. And there was a way you could make decisions on certain things. And you haven't changed your values or your belief as a Democrat or your values or belief as a Republican, but you got this stuff done. I mean, as an example, there was a situation where we had a number of horrific vehicle accidents involving double-bottom trailers, semi-tractor trailers that carried 2 loads, and especially those that carried fuel. And these tankers would flip over, blow up, and incinerate anybody who was within 30 or 40 yards. And you had a number of deaths. And something needed to be done. And you had the trucking industry arguing against doing this, and you had families of the victims and the auto safety people screaming that you had to just ban these double tankers anyway. And in some states they had triples, and they wanted to go to triple, the truckers did. And they worked out a deal. They worked out an arrangement. Republicans and Democrats together worked it out, and they said you can do this, but you have to meet certain safety requirements. And you can't carry these things in certain highly populated areas and things like that. And the problem immediately went away. We've not had a serious accident like that since. Democrats voted for it, Republicans voted for it. I'd put a bet out that you couldn't get a deal like that, period. No. It would all be one side in the end, and it would therefore be an agreement that, in the end, the majority of people don't agree with. And this has been ongoing and growing. I mean, when I came back in 1993, I was astonished at how partisan the legislature had gotten at that point. And that seems like good times now compared. I mean, they worked out Proposal A. They found a way of doing this. They couldn't do that now. I don't see any possible way they could do that now.
You said you had a personal theory as to why.
Well, I think many people are familiar with Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation. My parents were part of that generation. These are the people that lived through the Great Depression and World War II. They figured out how to get things done because they didn't have a choice. It's sad in so many respects that there are very few people left who can talk directly about the effects of the Depression and World War II. Doesn't matter what you feel, doesn't matter what you think. We've got a goddamn problem here, and we've got to fix it. And so many of the legislators at that time, in the 1970s, were from that era, had been born in the early 20th century, or if they hadn't been, they were born in the late 30s or the early 40s. They had some memory, or their parents had been involved with it. They understood that you find a way to figure out a problem. I hate to say it, to a certain degree, starting with the boomers, and then it didn't get any better, generations X and then Z and the millennials, a sense of, I don't have to get along with them. I don't care. If you're not going to do what I want, then screw you. And unfortunately, to a large degree, that's what's become, even though we know that people want people to figure their problems out. And even though we know if you take politics out of it, inherently we understand that we need to be a part of a solution. And yet when it comes down to finding a solution politically, figuring out how to reach agreement, we've given up trying.
We're speaking with John Lindstrom, longtime Lansing journalist, former publisher of Gongwer News Service, and an inductee this year into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. John, which governor was most interesting to cover?
Well, every one of them was interesting in their own way. Now, I honestly think that William Milliken was arguably the greatest governor the state ever had. Republican, but he was more than able to work with Democrats. And the reason I say that is because we started undergoing a massive economic change about that time in the 70s. You had the oil crisis, the first oil crisis after the Yom Kippur War between Israel and the Arab states. There was the oil boycott, so that changed the whole industry. All of a sudden, the industry didn't give a damn about mileage at that time. You know, you could get a mile a gallon, they were fine. That changed the whole industry. All of a sudden, international autos became a big deal. Michigan struggled, and Milliken was on top of that change, moving Michigan to a change in its economy. Its economy still is maybe a little too heavily oriented on manufacturing, but the economy is balanced out much better. He was also very involved in the start of the environmental movement. He was very involved in a lot of aspects on civil rights, and that means not just in terms of the races, but also in terms of women's rights, the start of the effort to get involved with gay rights, things like that. He was very involved in that. So he was, I think, the best governor, the greatest governor we've had. Every one of the governors we've had has been pretty good. I mean, I think we were fortunate in having overall pretty good governors. I had my disagreements with every one of them, personally disagreements with every one of them. And some of them, I mean, the advantage that Milliken and then Jim Blanchard and then John Engler all have is that they were in the government system. They understood how government works. That became a problem to a certain degree for Governor Granholm, Jennifer Granholm. She had been Attorney General, but still really had not been heavily involved in the day-to-day in terms of making government work, working with the different branches. So that took her some time to work out. Same with Governor Rick Snyder. As a businessman, and I think this is one of the things that business people need to understand is you can't run a government like a business because government ain't a business. It has a whole different function and purpose. You also have to remember that you were part of a process which involves other people. I mean, when he started, I think Snyder figured, well, I want you guys to do this, and then didn't understand why it wasn't getting done the way he wanted it done. There's an old story that when Eisenhower was president, a friend of his said, well, what's the big difference between being a general and being a president? And he said, when you're a general, you tell people to do things, they do them. And that, to a certain degree, that's true with being a governor. You have to learn how to work with the different branches of government, especially with the legislature. One of the more fascinating people that I dealt with was a state representative, William Ryan of Detroit, former speaker, probably the most consequential state legislator in Michigan history. He really, himself, you wouldn't think this is the guy who could do it. He wasn't a blowhard. He was just a simple, basic guy. But he knew how to get things done. He knew how to organize things. And he got the legislature into a structure where it was a genuine equal to the governor and made it so that the three branches could be equally powerful. So, Snyder figured it out, as did Governor Granholm. Of course, Governor Whitmer was in the legislature. Each of them had their own issues. Each of them had their own problems. I mean, we certainly saw that with the last session, and that's part of the issue where we talk about the extreme partisanship. I'm baffled by how it was Governor Whitmer had a completely Democratic-controlled legislature and yet could not get some of the basic things finished and done. I don't know why they didn't use that power. Blanchard, in many respects, was fun because if you think about, here's a guy you'd like to go out and have a beer with. I mean, Blanchard was that kind of guy, In fact, I went to opening day for the Tigers, 85, 86, 87, something like that. My dad, for business purposes, had season tickets. So I'm there with a friend of mine, a guy who was an editor at the Free Press at the time. And they're playing the Red Sox. I remember that. I forget who was at bat, but somebody hit this foul ball that bounced over by one of the box seats, and this guy in a blue blazer is falling over the seats trying to grab this ball, and all these other guys grabbing him. I'm looking at my buddy and I said, look at that dope. Look at that dope. Well, they pull him up, and the dope is the governor of the state of Michigan. And so there's Blanchard going. And, of course, he's holding up the ball and showing it to everybody. So I mean, he was, he could be a very fun guy, in his own way.
What do you want people to know about the state capitol? What should someone know about Lansing?
What I'd like people to know about the Capitol, not the building itself necessarily, but the concept of the Capitol is that, they work for you. You're the boss. But like any good boss, you also got to know the business. You got to know what's supposed to be done, how it's supposed to be done. You're the ones running the show. You need to know how to run it. You're the ones that need to understand what the processes are. And you're the ones that need to really understand what the facts are. And you need to really demand to have it. You want to listen to Fox, you want to listen to MSN Now, I guess I call it. Fine, I don't care. But you need to have a basis in verifiable fact. You need to know what is actually happening, why it's happening. You need to know what the background of it is. This is happening because this happened then. That happened because that happened before it. And on and on and on. Why do we have the issues we have right now with Proposal A and the pop-up tax and that sort of thing? It was because we were trying to find a more equitable way to finance schools. And from that, now maybe we need to make changes to it. But that's why. We didn't just do this for fun. It happened because it was something that needed to be done. So that's what I would say. The Capitol is really everybody in this state, everybody in this country. So act like you know what you're doing.
John Lindstrom, longtime Capitol journalist, former publisher of Gongwer News Service, and still writing columns for the Detroit Free Press. John, it's been a pleasure.
Well, it's been a great fun talking with you. Thank you so much.
And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark. We are off next week, but we will be back in September. Talk to you then.